The rain hammered against the wooden walls of the cabin with such ferocity that Sarah Mitchell thought the whole structure might collapse. And then through the deafening storm came 3 sharp knocks that would change everything she thought she knew about loneliness and love. Sarah stood frozen in the center of her small Wyoming homestead, the oil lamp flickering in her trembling hand. It was late October in 1882, and she had been alone on this land for nearly 8 months since her father passed away from pneumonia the previous winter. At 22 years old, she had inherited nothing but debts, a failing cattle operation, and the stubborn determination that ran through the Mitchell bloodline like iron through ore. The knocking came again, more urgent this time. Sarah set down the lamp and retrieved the rifle from above the door frame, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had heard stories about drifters and outlaws who preyed on isolated homesteads, especially those run by women alone. "Who is there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please, ma'am," came a man's voice, rough and strained. "My horse threw me a mile back. I need shelter from this storm. I mean you no harm." Sarah hesitated, her finger resting near the trigger. The wind howled through the gaps in the door, bringing with it sheets of icy rain. She thought about her father, about how he had always said that Wyoming winters could kill a man faster than any bullet, and how turning someone away in weather like this was the same as murder. "Step back from the door," she commanded. "Keep your hands where I can see them." She pulled open the heavy wooden door, the rifle aimed at the figure on her porch. What she saw made her breath catch. A man stood in the downpour, soaked through to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his face. Blood ran from a gash above his eyebrow, mixing with the rain. His hands were raised empty and shaking from cold. His eyes, even in the dim light spilling from her doorway, were the clearest blue she had ever seen. "Thank you," he said through chattering teeth, "and thank you." Sarah lowered the rifle slightly but kept it ready. "Come in slowly, no sudden movements." The man stepped across the threshold, water pooling immediately at his feet. He was tall, she noticed, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who spent his days in the saddle. His clothes, though drenched, were quality made, his boots worn but well crafted. This was no common drifter. "Sit there." Sarah gestured to a chair near the fireplace, far enough from her that she could react if needed. "Do not move." She kept the rifle trained on him as she moved to close the door against the storm. The cabin suddenly felt smaller with another person in it, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the lightning flashing outside. "I am going to get some cloth for that cut," she said. "If you try anything, I will not hesitate to shoot." The man nodded, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "I understand, ma'am. I would do the same in your position. My name is James Cordell. I have been trailing a herd up from Colorado, heading to the railhead in Cheyenne. Storm spooked my horse near that rocky pass about a mile east of here." Sarah moved carefully to her small storage chest, pulling out clean rags while maintaining visual contact with her unexpected guest. She approached him slowly, the rifle now resting in the crook of her arm, still accessible. "This is going to sting," she said, dabbing at the cut above his eye. Up close, she could see he was probably around 26 or 27, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. There was something honest in his face, something that made her instincts whisper that he was telling the truth. James winced but did not pull away. "I have had worse. Thank you for your kindness, Miss Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell." She stepped back, wrapping the wound with a strip of cloth. "You can stay until the storm passes, but you sleep in that chair. I will be in the other room with this rifle, and I am a light sleeper." "Fair enough," James said, a slight smile crossing his face. "Though I hope you might spare a blanket. I would hate to catch my death after you have been kind enough to save my life." Sarah found herself almost smiling back before she caught herself. She retrieved a wool blanket from her father's old room and tossed it to James, then retreated to her bedroom, closing the door firmly behind her. She sat on her bed, the rifle across her lap, listening to the storm rage outside and the sounds of the stranger settling in by her fire. She did not sleep much that night. Every creak of the floorboards made her start, but no threat came. As dawn broke gray and wet through her window, she heard James moving around quietly. Sarah grabbed the rifle and opened the door to find him stoking the fire, the blanket folded neatly on the chair. "I did not mean to wake you," he said, turning to face her. In the morning light, with his hair dried and pushed back from his face, he looked different, younger somehow, and undeniably handsome in a way that made Sarah's stomach flutter unexpectedly. "I figured I could at least make myself useful before I impose on you for breakfast." "I did not say anything about breakfast," Sarah replied, though her tone was softer than the night before. "No, you did not," James agreed, "but I am hoping you might take pity on a poor cowboy who has not eaten since yesterday morning. I can work for it if you like. I noticed your fence line on the east side is down. Could use some mending before your cattle wander off." Sarah stared at him, surprised. "You scouted my property before you came to my door?" "No, ma'am," James said quickly. "I saw it when I was stumbling through the dark looking for shelter. Hard to miss with the way those posts were leaning. I used to work fence repair on my father's ranch in Texas before I started trailing cattle north. I am good with my hands." There was nothing improper in the statement, but something in the way he said it made Sarah's cheeks warm. She busied herself with putting the rifle back above the door, trying to compose herself. "Fine," she said. "I'll make breakfast. But you eat, and then you mend that fence before you leave. Deal?" "Deal," James said, and his smile was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Sarah cooked bacon and eggs, biscuits and coffee, more than she had made for herself in months. They ate in surprising companionship, James asking polite questions about her land and cattle operation. She found herself telling him about her father, about the struggle to keep the ranch running, about the creditors who circled like vultures waiting for her to fail. "That is a heavy load for anyone," James said quietly, "let alone someone alone. Do you have any help at all?" "I had a ranch hand, but I could not afford to keep paying him," Sarah admitted, then wondered why she was being so honest with this stranger. "I have been managing on my own." James was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. "The fence will not take me long to fix. Should be done by noon. But I noticed your barn roof has some loose boards too. And those water troughs need reinforcing before the real cold sets in." "I know," Sarah said, frustration creeping into her voice. "I know everything that needs doing. Knowing and being able to do it are two different things." "I could help," James said simply, "if you would let me." Sarah looked at him sharply. "I cannot afford to hire anyone." "I am not asking for money," James replied. "Just meals and a place to sleep. The barn would be fine. Truth is, the herd I was trailing scattered in the storm yesterday. It is going to take the other hands a few days to round them all up. I am supposed to meet them in Cheyenne in 2 weeks. I have time to spare, and I would rather spend it being useful than sitting in some saloon drinking away my pay." Sarah wanted to say no. Every instinct told her that letting this man stay was dangerous, not because she feared he would harm her, but because of the way her heart had started beating faster whenever he looked at her with those clear blue eyes. "1 week," she heard herself say. "You can stay 1 week. You work during the day, you sleep in the barn at night, and you keep your distance. Understood?" "Understood," James said, and she could see the relief in his face. "You will not regret this, Sarah, I promise." It was the first time he had used her given name, and she liked the way it sounded in his voice far more than she should have. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. James was up before dawn, already working when Sarah emerged from the cabin. He repaired the fence line, reinforced the barn roof, fixed the water troughs, and a dozen other tasks that Sarah had been struggling to manage alone. He worked with the quiet competence of someone who knew ranch life intimately, never complaining, never asking for more than she offered. In the evenings, they would share dinner, and James would tell stories about his travels. He had been born in Texas, he said, on a ranch his grandfather had established, but when his father died and his older brother inherited everything, James had struck out on his own, taking work where he could find it, seeing the West from Mexico to Montana. "Do you miss it?" Sarah asked one night as they sat by the fire, the October cold pressing against the cabin walls. "Having a place of your own?" James was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Every day," he admitted, "but wanting something and being able to have it are two different things. I learned that early." Sarah understood that bone deep. She wanted to keep her father's ranch, wanted to prove she could make it work, but the debt and the isolation and the sheer physical impossibility of managing everything alone were crushing her slowly. "What will you do when you reach Cheyenne?" she asked. "After you get paid for the trail drive?" James shrugged. "Find another job, I suppose. Maybe head south before winter really sets in. I have heard there is work in New Mexico, or maybe I will try my luck in California. I have never seen the ocean." The thought of him leaving, of going back to being alone, made something twist painfully in Sarah's chest. It had only been 5 days, but already she had grown used to his presence. The cabin felt less empty with his voice in it. The work felt less impossible with his help. And when he smiled at her, she felt something she had not felt since before her father died: hope. "Sarah," James said suddenly, his voice serious. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I know it is not my place, but I have to say this. You are running yourself into the ground trying to manage this place alone. You are strong, stronger than anyone I have ever met, but even the strongest person needs help sometimes." "I do not have a choice," Sarah said, hearing the exhaustion in her own voice. "I cannot afford help." "What if you did not have to pay?" James said. "What if someone wanted to help because they cared about what happened to you?" Sarah's breath caught. "What are you saying?" James ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I am saying that these past few days working here, being here with you, have meant something to me. I am saying that when I think about leaving, about going to Cheyenne, and then moving on to wherever the next job takes me, something in my chest feels wrong. I am saying that maybe I do not want to keep drifting. Maybe I want to stay." "James," Sarah whispered. Sarah, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "I know it is fast," he continued, the words coming quickly now. "I know you barely know me, and you have every reason to be cautious. But Sarah, I have not felt this way about anyone, ever. You are brave and smart and beautiful. And when I am working on this land, I can imagine a future that does not involve endless trails and temporary jobs. I can imagine a home." Sarah stood up, her heart pounding. "You have known me for 5 days. "I know," James said, standing as well. "But sometimes 5 days is enough to know something real when you feel it. Tell me you do not feel it too." She wanted to deny it, to protect herself from the vulnerability of admitting the truth. But looking at him, at the hope and fear mingled in his expression, she could not lie. "I feel it," she admitted quietly. "But feeling something is not enough. I have a mountain of debt. I have a ranch that is barely surviving. I have nothing to offer you except hard work and uncertainty." James crossed the space between them in 2 strides, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You have yourself. That is everything." "You do not know what you are saying," Sarah said, but her voice was shaking. "You would be tying yourself to a sinking ship." "Then we will bail water together," James said simply. "Sarah, I have spent 5 years drifting from place to place, never finding anywhere that felt right. But here, with you, I feel like I have finally found where I am supposed to be. Let me stay. Let me help you fight for this place. Let me be part of your life." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. She had been alone for so long, fighting so hard, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone on her side. "What about Cheyenne? She asked. "What about the money you are owed?" "I will ride out tomorrow, meet the herd, collect my pay, and come back," James said. "It will take me 4 days there and back. When I return, we can use that money to pay down some of your debts. It is not much, but it is a start." I cannot ask you to do that, Sarah protested. You are not asking, James said. I am offering. I am choosing this. I am choosing you. Before she could think better of it, Sarah reached up and took his face in her hands, pulling him down into a kiss that was fierce and desperate and full of all the loneliness and hope she had been carrying alone. James wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, and for the first time in 8 months, Sarah felt like she might actually survive what was coming. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. I am going to take that as a yes. Sarah laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. Yes, stay, help me fight. Just do not make me regret trusting you. Never, James promised. I swear it on everything I have. He left the next morning on a horse Sarah lent him, promising to be back within 4 days. Sarah watched him ride away with her heart in her throat, terrified that he would reach civilization and realize what a foolish promise he had made. But exactly 4 days later, just as the sun was setting, she saw a rider coming up the trail and knew, even from a distance, that it was James. He swung down from the horse with a grin, pulling a leather pouch from his saddlebag. $90. Every cent I was owed. Where do we start? Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face as she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. The bank! We start with the bank. They were threatening to foreclose next month. Then tomorrow we ride into town together, James said, holding her close, and we show them you are not giving up without a fight. The trip to town the next day was the first time Sarah had left the ranch in weeks. She sat straight in the saddle beside James, feeling stronger with him beside her. The banker, a portly man named Hendricks, who had been her father's friend, looked surprised to see her walk in with a cowboy at her side and cash in her hand. Miss Mitchell, he said cautiously, I was not expecting you. I am here to make a payment on my loan, Sarah said firmly, setting the leather pouch on his desk. $90 toward the principal. Hendricks opened the pouch, counting the money carefully. This is good, Miss Mitchell, but you still owe over $300. I'm not sure this changes your situation significantly. It shows I'm serious about paying, Sarah replied, and I'm not alone anymore. This is James Cordell. He is going to be helping me run the ranch. We will make the next payment within 2 months. Hendricks looked between them, something knowing in his eyes. I see. Well, I will credit this to your account. But Miss Mitchell, I need to be honest with you. The board is losing patience. If you cannot make substantial progress soon, there may not be anything I can do to help you. I understand, Sarah said. Thank you for the extra time. As they left the bank, James took her hand, not caring who in the small Wyoming town saw them. We will make it work, he said quietly. I promise you. The next 2 months tested that promise in ways neither of them could have anticipated. An early blizzard swept through in late November, killing 3 of Sarah's cattle. James spent 2 days in sub-zero temperatures digging the survivors out of snowdrifts, nearly losing his fingers to frostbite in the process. Sarah nursed him through the recovery, wrapping his hands in warm cloths and dosing him with whiskey to ease the pain. You could have died out there, she said fiercely, fear making her angry. But I did not, James replied. His words slurred from the whiskey. Those cattle are your livelihood, Sarah. I was not going to let them freeze. They are just animals, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. You are not. Do not ever scare me like that again. James reached up with his bandaged hand, clumsily wiping away her tears. I love you, he said simply. I should have said it before now, but I love you, Sarah Mitchell. I would walk through 1,000 blizzards if it meant keeping you safe. Sarah kissed him then, gentle and careful, mindful of his injuries. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. So much it terrifies me. When James recovered, he rode into the nearest large town and took a job working nights at a cattle yard, loading freight cars bound for eastern markets. He would leave the ranch in the afternoon, work through the night, and return at dawn to help Sarah with the morning chores before sleeping for a few hours. It was brutal, exhausting work, but the money was steady. Sarah sold her mother's silver tea service, a painful sacrifice, but a necessary one. She took in mending from other ranches, her fingers bleeding from pushing needles through thick canvas and leather. Together they scraped and saved every penny. In late January 1883, they rode back to the bank with $200. Hendricks looked genuinely impressed. "I will admit I did not think you could do it," he said. "This pays off over half what you still owe." "We will have the rest by spring," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "I believe you might," Hendricks replied, smiling for the first time. "Your father would be proud of you, Miss Mitchell." That night, back at the ranch, Sarah and James sat together by the fire, exhausted but hopeful. James had quit the cattle yard job, unable to sustain the pace any longer, but they had a plan. Spring would bring new calves to sell, and James had heard about a contract hauling timber to the railway that would pay well. "We are going to make it," Sarah said, hardly daring to believe it. "We are," James agreed. He shifted, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small wooden box. "Sarah, I know this is not the most romantic moment, and I do not have much to offer you yet, but I cannot wait any longer to ask you this." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's ring. It is the only thing of value I own. Sarah Mitchell, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband, your partner in all of this?" Sarah felt her heart expand until it seemed impossible her chest could contain it. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." James slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and they held each other as the fire burned low and the Wyoming wind howled outside, no longer feeling like a threat but like music celebrating their victory. They were married in March of 1883 by a traveling preacher who made his rounds through the isolated ranches. There was no fancy ceremony, no guests beyond the preacher and old Mr. Henderson from the neighboring ranch who served as witness. Sarah wore her mother's blue dress, altered to fit her. James wore his cleanest shirt and a borrowed jacket. But when he said his vows, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, Sarah felt like the wealthiest woman alive. The timber contract James had heard about came through, and he spent April and May hauling loads to the railhead. The work was hard but paid well. Sarah's calves sold for good prices at the market, and by late May, they walked into Hendricks's bank with the final payment on her father's loan. $132, Sarah said, counting out the money with deep satisfaction. "That clears the debt in full." Hendricks drew up the papers, stamping them with an official seal. "The ranch is yours free and clear, Mrs. Cordell. Congratulations." Mrs. Cordell. Sarah was still getting used to the name, but she loved how it sounded. That summer was one of the happiest times of Sarah's life. With the debt cleared, they could finally invest in the ranch itself. They bought new breeding stock, repaired the barn properly, and even added a room onto the cabin. James proved to be not just a hard worker, but a natural rancher, with an instinct for cattle and horses that elevated their operation. But more than the financial stability, it was the small moments that Sarah treasured. James singing while he worked, his voice carrying across the fields, the way he would catch her around the waist when she passed him, stealing a kiss. The evenings they spent planning their future, dreaming bigger now that survival was no longer the only goal. In September, Sarah realized her monthly cycle was late. She waited another week before allowing herself to hope, then another week to be sure. When she finally told James, he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Sarah, we are having a baby." "I know," she said, laughing. "I am the one who is going to have to birth it, remember?" James set her down carefully, suddenly protective. "Are you feeling well? Do you need to rest? Should you be working so hard?" "I am pregnant, not fragile," Sarah said, amused by his concern. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. But yes, you can take over mucking out the stalls if you are feeling particularly chivalrous." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and winter. As Sarah's belly swelled, James became even more attentive, taking on every heavy task and fretting whenever she so much as stumbled. She found his concern endearing and exasperating in equal measure. Their son was born on a clear April morning in 1884, his cries strong and healthy. James held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Sarah's father. As she watched James cradle their son, singing softly to quiet his cries, Sarah felt a peace she had never imagined possible. This family, this life they had built together from nothing, was everything she had never dared to dream of. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, but they faced everything together, James and Sarah, partners in every sense of the word. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from a failing homestead into one of the most respected operations in the territory. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and following his father around the ranch. When he was 3, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, who had her mother's determination and her father's blue eyes. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they called Jacob. On a warm evening in June of 1889, Sarah stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching James teach Thomas how to rope a fence post while Grace chased chickens around the yard and Jacob napped against her shoulder. 7 years had passed since that rainy October night when a stranger knocked on her door, and sometimes it felt like a dream. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, climbing the porch steps after leaving Thomas to practice on his own. He slipped an arm around her waist, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "That night you showed up," Sarah said quietly. "How terrified I was, how close I came to not opening the door." James pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank God you did." "Thank God you stayed," Sarah replied, leaning into him, "through every storm that followed." "Where else would I go?" James said softly. "You are my home, Sarah. You always will be." As the sun set over the Wyoming hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah felt the weight of her sleeping son against her chest, her husband's arm around her waist, and heard the laughter of her children playing in the yard. This life, built from desperation and hope, from hard work and fierce love, was more than she had ever imagined possible. The ranch that had almost destroyed her with its burden had become her legacy. The man who had arrived as a desperate stranger had become her partner, her love, the father of her children. And every storm that had threatened to tear them apart had only made them stronger. Thomas managed to rope the fence post on his 5th try, whooping with triumph. James called out praise, ruffling their son's hair when he ran over to show off his success. Grace abandoned the chickens to beg for a turn with the rope. Jacob stirred against Sarah's shoulder, making small sounds of waking. This was the life they had fought for, the future they had built together, and as James looked back at her, his eyes still as clear and blue as that first night, still looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, Sarah knew that every struggle had been worth it. The rainy night had brought a stranger to her door, but what had started as desperate charity had become the greatest love story Sarah could have imagined. James had stayed through every storm just as he had promised, and together they had built something that would last for generations. Years later, when their children were grown with families of their own, when Thomas had taken over managing the ranch, and Grace had married a banker in Cheyenne, and Jacob had become a veterinarian serving ranches throughout the territory, Sarah and James would sit on that same porch in the evening light. James's hair had gone silver, and Sarah's hands were marked with the wear of decades of work, but when he took her hand in his, the feeling was the same as it had been that first night when he had promised to stay. "No regrets?" James would ask, like he did sometimes, his eyes twinkling because he already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Sarah would reply, squeezing his hand. "You?" "Only that I did not knock on your door sooner," James would say, pulling her close. "But I found you eventually. That is what matters." And as they sat together, watching the sun set over the land they had saved together, the ranch that had become their legacy, surrounded by the family they had built through love and determination, and unwavering commitment to each other, Sarah knew that this was the happy ending she had stopped believing in the night James arrived. The storm that brought him to her door had been the first of many they would weather together. But every challenge had only proven what Sarah had known in her heart from that very first night. Some strangers are meant to stay. Some loves are worth fighting for. And some storms bring not destruction but the promise of everything you never knew you needed. Their story, which began with 3 desperate knocks on a cabin door during a Wyoming rainstorm, became the foundation story of the Cordell Ranch, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren would ask to hear about the night Grandma Sarah let a stranger in from the storm and how he stayed to help her save everything she had. But the part they always wanted to hear most was the ending. The part where Sarah would smile and take James's hand and say, "And he stayed through every storm that followed. He stayed, and we built a life that was bigger and more beautiful than anything I could have imagined alone." That is what real love is. It is choosing to stay when staying is hard. It is building together when building seems impossible. It is finding home in another person's heart. And James would add, his voice still strong even in old age, "And it is knowing that you would make the same choice again every single time. I would knock on that door 1,000 times and I would stay 1,000 lifetimes because every day with you is the best day of my life." That was how their story ended and how it continued in the love they had built that lasted not just through their lifetime but echoed forward into the future. A testament to the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments that scare us most, from the choices we make to trust when trust seems foolish, and from the love we allow ourselves to feel even when love seems impossible. The rainy night brought a stranger to her door. The cowboy stayed through every storm that followed, and together they proved that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is not the storm itself, but the love that shelters you through it, the partnership that helps you rebuild after it passes, and the commitment to stand together no matter what weather comes next. Their love story, forged in desperation and hardship, tempered by struggle and sacrifice, became something unbreakable. And when Sarah and James finally passed within months of each other as couples who have truly become one often do, they left behind not just a prosperous ranch and a large family, but a legacy of what it means to fight for love, to choose partnership over independence, and to build something lasting through commitment, trust, and unwavering devotion. The cabin where it all began still stood for decades after, preserved by their children as a reminder of where their family story started. And on rainy nights, when storms rolled across the Wyoming hills, those who lived there said they could almost hear the echo of that first desperate knock, the sound that changed everything, the moment when 2 lives collided and became one story, one love, one unbreakable bond that would last through every storm that followed and every sunset that came after.